The Constitution Act of Canada, 1982. Part 1. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. In the Constitution Act, we're going to find different players. We're going to find different designations. We're going to find different roles that a human being, a man or a woman, can play. So here in Article 2, you see that it states that everyone has the following fundamental freedoms. So the player or the subject in this article of law is everyone. So this applies to everyone. Now you scroll down and you see Article 3. It says every citizen of Canada has the right to vote in an election. Now, designation or the subject in Article 3 is no longer an everyone. It's now become an every citizen. It doesn't say everyone who is in Canada has the right to vote, because only a citizen has the right to vote. But it shows you the distinction in designation. An everyone or every citizen. Now we keep scrolling down and we get back here again. Every citizen, that's Article 6. Scroll down, Article 7, everyone. Again, here's the subject that they're talking to, everyone. Scroll down and now we see Article 11, any person. So we've got three, if you will say, designations, three subjects in this Canadian Charter. We've got an everyone, a citizen, and a person. The Criminal Code of Canada, again keeping with the subjects or players or designations that are in law. Article 279. Every person commits an offense who kidnaps a person with the intent. So now, person. And again, every person. And now, everyone. Every person. You'll actually find every person. As you go through the criminal code, it'll say every owner, every individual, every citizen, every person, or everyone. So the different subjects, the different designations that a man or a human being is being forced to play or being rendered is coming out also in the criminal code. Black Laws, 9th edition, citizen, a person who, by either birth or naturalization, is a member of a political community, owing allegiance to the community. Now we go into the Citizenship Act of Canada, and it talks about the oath or affirmation that a citizen must take here in Canada. Now it says that, I swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty. So there it is, being faithful and bearing true allegiance to Her Majesty and her successors, which is a political party. So Black Laws, indeed, and the Citizenship Act of Canada agree together that a citizen is a person who owes allegiance to a political party or to a sovereign. Artificial person, an entity such as a corporation, but not exclusive to a corporation, created by law and given certain legal rights and duties of a human being. A being, real or imaginary, who, for the purpose of legal reasoning, is treated more or less as a human being. But it is said that this restrictive signification is not necessarily inherent in the word, and that it may, in proper cases, include artificial persons. See also person. When we look into the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Constitution Act of 1982, or the Criminal Code of Canada, we find that there's different subjects, different players being enumerated or being listed, being spoken about. We find that there's an everyone, the designation of everyone. And in that designation of everyone is where we find also the human being, the man or the woman. We also find in those articles person, the designation of person, or the designation of citizen, or once again, the designation of individual. Now, Black law states that the word individual, or legal dictionaries state that the word individual can refer to the artificial. So, the person, the citizen, and the individual can all or is all referring to the artificial. However, the individual here can also refer to the human being. As the human being, you can enter in, you can take recognition as an individual. That's your right. That is why we see in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 16, and in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Freedoms, Article 6, it states that everyone has a right or can take recognition or can take the designation of person in law. You have that right, but no obligation. Now, everyone here has to be referring to the human being. Because if everyone would be referring to a Canadian citizen, then it would say a Canadian citizen has a right or can take recognition as a person before the law. But we know that a Canadian citizen is already considered a person before the law. Everyone is referring to the human being. It's not referring to the person. Because if you use the word person here to describe everyone, you would say a person has a right or can take recognition or designation as a person before the law. And same thing if you add a citizen or individual. So we're concerned about, in our expression of our fundamental rights and freedoms, we're concerned about the word everyone. And taking it and applying it and using its designation as a human being. And for those who are uncomfortable with that word because they feel that it means something less than a man, then title yourself a man. Whichever way, you're still taking a title, whether it be human being or man. The one thing is that when you use the word human being, in my understanding, in my knowledge, it's qualification, it's telling you it is a recognition of a man with all his rights and freedoms. And the human being is what is written about more often than not in law. You'll find the word man mostly in the international covenants and sometimes in domestic law, but more than often than not you're going to find the word human being, and that's an expression of everyone. Everyone, the human being, can take recognition as a person before law, that being an artificial person, because a person is a creation of law. Now, a person is given. Now we know that we're not really given. Here in Canada, the Financial Administration Act say that we pay for what this law says that we're given. Nevertheless, it says that we're given certain rights or freedoms of a human being. And that a person is treated more or less like a human being. Once again, we know in Canada that for our rights and freedoms or privileges and benefits of the person, we pay for permits and licenses to have these benefits and privileges. Now, a person is given certain rights and freedoms of a human being and is treated more or less like a human being. Now, my question is, what is missing then? If when we take designation as a person, and it says that now we're being treated or given certain rights and freedoms of a human being, well, what exactly then are we missing? And what are the rights and fundamental freedoms of a human being that we don't have, or that we are not fulfilling, or that is not available to us when we do take recognition as the person? Because clearly it says that when we do take recognition as the person, we have certain, notice that qualification, certain, not all of them, but certain rights and freedoms of a human being. So we're losing something when we step over here. Whatever it is that we have and hold, whatever freedoms and rights that we have here, when we step onto this side as a person, we lose. We're losing something. Now what is it? One of the first clear distinctions in what we give up when we take designation into the legal person or recognition into that person is a human being is born free and has the capacity to remain free. Free. But a person gets qualified as a citizen, a subject of the state, who owes allegiance to the Queen here in Canada and to the political power that's operating on behalf of the Queen. And a person, the citizen, is governed by the enactments. So therein, it's the fundamental difference right in the beginning. A human being is free and has the capacity to remain free, but when you give up that freedom and you take on the person or the personhood, you therefore lose your freedom. Because now you owe allegiance and you must follow and you are governed by the enactments. A human being, a man or a woman, who you can find under everyone, has rights and fundamental freedoms. Listen to those words, rights and fundamental freedoms. A person, a citizen, has rights, privileges, and benefits. Privileges and benefits. And the person, he must pay for those benefits or privileges. Again, through the form of a license or permit or other type of authorization. A human being, his rights and fundamental freedoms are owed to you. An obligation. You can look at it as a debt obligation towards you. They owe you your rights and fundamental freedoms. So this here is, if you will, the foundation of the difference. A person, he has rights. But the rights that he has is not the same as a human being. Because the rights that he has, he's paying to get that right. So if a person wants to drive, he's going to pay to get that right in the form of a license or a permit. If a person wants to fish, he's going to pay for that right in the form of a license or a permit. If a person wants to shoot a gun at a gun range, he's going to pay for that right through a license or a permit. Most every right that a person gets, he pays for. Now, again, I like to use this example. If you want water for your home, it's a right, it's a privilege, it's a benefit that the Queen gives to the person, and you have to pay for it through the authorization of a tax account. And if you fail to pay that tax account, then you will not have the right or privileged water for your home. So every right and basically every benefit that you get through the person, you pay for it. Now, the human being, he has rights and fundamental freedoms also that are guaranteed or owed to him. And he doesn't or she doesn't have to pay for it. And he doesn't or she doesn't have to express it in the forms or in the means of a permit or a license or any type of other authorization. Maybe besides a financial authorization, when the government is fulfilling your fundamental rights and freedoms, but apart from that, if a human being wants to travel, they have the right to travel without having to pay for it. If a human being needs to hunt, they have the right to hunt without having to pay for it. If a human being wants to do anything that doesn't cause harm or damage to their fellow human being, well, that's a fundamental right and freedom that they have. In the international covenants, we see an expression that says that everyone has the following rights. Everyone has the right to have access to a social system. Everyone. So whether you're a human being or whether you've been designated and are operating under the recognition as a person, you have the right to access social systems. Now, the international covenants state, now these are covenants that Canada are obligatory to follow, but it states that everyone has the right to adequate food, housing, clothing, and to the continued improvement of living conditions. That's a right that everyone has and can call upon that right to be expressed in their life. Now, a person in the social system, whatever help they get, whatever social system they're under, it does not meet the human being's fundamental rights. People who are on welfare all across Canada, they can barely afford to pay their rent, let alone feed themselves. People who find themselves unemployed because they were pursuing a living and they lost their job, they get 55% of their unemployment or of their pay that they used to make, which does not permit them to properly take care of themselves. The social systems that are an expression for the person, they are not meeting our fundamental needs as human beings. Because by terming us or designating us as persons, there's no more obligation upon the government or upon the ministers to fulfill the fundamental rights and freedoms of a human being. That being, you have the right to a continued improvement of your living condition, not to be stuck in poverty. However, they take the finances here in Canada that you give them as workers, that you give them as a Canadian citizen, and they continue to feed the pockets of the rich, while the human beings who have entered into recognition as persons and are allowing themselves to be taxed and are allowing themselves to pay into all this, believing that it's for the better of mankind, is actually hurting themselves and mankind, because we're allowing those in the position of authority to strip us not only of money through taxes and other means, but also of our rights and freedoms. Because the social systems that they've created here in Canada, they don't fulfill our fundamental rights and freedoms as a human being. And we don't say nothing about it. But yet the banks can make $4 billion profits each every year. Or I can give you more examples, but you see where the money is going to a few, to the corporations, instead of meeting our rights and freedoms. Because they've done this to us, classed us as persons, and hid all this through words in law, so that we wouldn't know. Because if there's an obligation, if we see there's an obligation and a liability upon the government, then we can go to them and claim our rights and claim the liability that they have. And if they do a good job in deception at hiding all this and only showing all this, then when you read the international covenants, one thing is very clear. The human being, the human being has free education. It's a fundamental right that he is or she is entitled to. A person here in Canada must pay for an education through a loan if they can't afford it outright. Now, education, the primary reason for education was supposed to be this. Listen, it was supposed to be this: the promotion and teaching of human rights and fundamental freedoms. I know that sounds funny, because when you look at our educational system, it has nothing to do with fundamental rights and freedoms of a human being and teaching and promoting that. Far be it from it. But that was the forefront. That was the primary calling or primary motive for what education was supposed to be here in our country. Secondary to that, it was for a person who would be deciding to pursue, now that's the word, pursue after a living in society. That they said education would have to help that person who would be pursuing after a living. They flipped it around. Education is primarily, and you could use the word only, for a person to pursue a living, to find his spot in the society. Get an education, get a diploma, get a good job, pursue your living, and make some good money. That's what education is about, and that's what it promotes. However, it was originally the intent of education was supposed to be for all of us the promotion and teaching of our human rights and freedoms. And some would laugh and say, well, maybe not laugh, but some would get a bit confused and say, well, how would that help me in society? How would I get a job? You don't understand what they've done to us, because you're not supposed to be pursuing a living like Mr. Jim Flaherty used in his video the other day when he addressed Canada and said, well, you have to do whatever you have to do to gain your living. And you can pursue a living and you can gain a living, but all of you who are pursuing and gaining a living right now are selling yourself short. You're part of why the corporations are making a whole bunch of money, because you as a human being, you have every right to work. That is your right, and it is a good thing if you choose to work. But the amount of income, the money that you should be getting for the work that you are doing, is so much more than what you are getting right now. And it's only through them stripping us of our fundamental rights and freedoms that they were able to pay you the salary that they're paying you for you when you pursue your living. But a human being, he has the right to enjoy a living and not pursue after a living. And when you read the international covenants, it clearly expresses itself that the human being indeed can enjoy his living. Everyone has the right to work, and he who chooses to work has the right to have a proper salary. Now here in Canada, we're taught that you are forced to work because our security, our fundamental rights and freedoms as a human being are not being fulfilled. They're not being spoken about, they're not being promoted, and they're not being fulfilled. The only rights, privileges, and benefits that we have, we are pursuing after in the form of persons. And as doing that, we're getting stripped of so much of our fundamental rights and freedoms. Now, as a human being, if you chose to work, this would be your choice now. If you chose to work, you would have a better income if you chose to work. But because as a person, they've placed you in a system and forced you to work, they can control the salary. They can control the amount of money that they can pay you in this worldly system, because they don't have the expression of your other fundamental rights and freedoms as a human being. So if you don't know about it, and if it's not available to you, then your only option is to work through the system as a person, and to pursue after that living, and to accept what is there, and to accept what is being offered, and try and make your way through it. And in making your way through it, you have nothing to say about really too much about what salary you're getting, or how you're being remunerated for the work that you're providing the corporations. But, and if I'll give you an example of this. We're all human beings, are recognized as human beings here in Canada, okay? And our fundamental rights and freedoms were being met, such as housing, food. And I'm talking about, you don't have to work for this, okay? You don't have to go out and pursue hours. You don't have to go out and work. This is being met for you because it's a fundamental right and freedom that belongs to you. Your housing, your clothing, your food, your hydro, your medication, and certain material needs that you have, and a continued improvement of this living condition year after year after year. That's a level of life. That's a level of life that all of us are entitled to here in Canada, and that we would all be placed in. It's the same level, no higher, no lower. Now, having met all those needs, and having all those fundamental needs being met for you, because there's enough wealth here in Canada to do this, subsequent to that, if you chose to work, you wouldn't go out now and work for $9 an hour at McDonald's. You wouldn't be forced to go out to McDonald's and work for $9 an hour, or go to the gas station and pump for $9 an hour, while the big oil company smoke their cigars and make a whole bunch of money off the little workers. Because all your fundamental rights and freedoms would be met, and you'd only have to work if you wanted the material goods, the material toys of this world. Then you would have to go and you would have to work. And by offering yourself for work, and they said, well, I'll pay you $9 an hour, you would think about it and say, I'm not going to accept $9 an hour. Why would I accept that? My energy is worth more than you. It would force the companies, here in Canada, the big boys who sit on top, to have to pay higher salaries for those human beings who would choose to work. Because now you're forced to pursue a living. Now you're forced to work. So when you're forced, you're put in that situation. As I said, they can control it. But if they met all of our fundamental rights and freedoms here in Canada, all 33 million of us, instead of feeding their bank accounts and paying interest of $160 million a day to the international bankers, then we would all be at the same level. And if I wanted to go work, if I wanted to go make extra money, I wouldn't put my energy into, for example, the same work that we're doing now for the little income that we get. Because I would say, I'm not forced to. I have food. I have a house. Or I have housing. I have clothing. I have the hydro to protect me from the elements. Why would I be forced to do this? Now in turn, the companies would have to offer better salaries. Instead of $10 an hour or something, let's say, they'd have to offer you something that's worthwhile.